It's a peculiar thing, the weight of a single piece of paper. For 42 years, I had believed my life's weight was measured in beakers and formulas, in the steady hum of a centrifuge, in the quiet satisfaction of a hypothesis proven correct. I thought it was measured in loyalty. But in the end, it all came down to a single, cold sheet of cream-colored cardstock, delivered by a courier on a Tuesday morning. The letterhead was embossed with the logo of OmniGen Pharmaceuticals, the company I had helped build from a hopeful little startup in a rented warehouse. The words were simple, sterile, and utterly devastating. My position as senior research chemist was being eliminated due to strategic realignment. I was to be made redundant, effective immediately. Redundant. A word that felt like being tossed into a bin of leftover parts, no longer useful to the machine I had spent a lifetime maintaining. My name is Lillian Hall, and for most of my adult life, my home away from home was a laboratory in Akron, Ohio. It wasn't a glamorous place, not in the way you see in films. It smelled of antiseptic and ozone, a scent I had come to associate with progress and purpose. I started there when I was just 22, a bright-eyed graduate with a head full of theories and a heart full of ambition. The founder, a wonderful man named Mr. Abernathy, had an old-world sense of honor. He saw potential in me, a quiet determination that others might have overlooked. He gave me a chance, and in return, I gave him my unwavering dedication. I remember my late husband, Frank, teasing me about it. He'd say, "Lily, you love those molecules more than you love me." He'd say it with a smile, of course, because he knew it wasn't true. But he also understood that my work was a part of my soul. Frank was a mechanic, a man who understood how things fit together. He'd come home with grease under his fingernails, and I'd have chemical stains on my lab coat. We were from different worlds, but we shared a belief in honest work and building something that lasts. He was proud of me, especially when I started my work on the compound. It wasn't a single discovery. It was a slow, painstaking journey that spanned nearly a decade. I was trying to find a way to repair damaged neural pathways, a key to unlocking treatments for some of the most cruel and debilitating neurodegenerative diseases. It was my mountain to climb. There were thousands of failed experiments, countless nights spent staring at data until my eyes burned. I missed anniversaries, family picnics, precious moments that I can never get back. Frank never complained. He would just quietly leave a thermos of hot coffee and a sandwich on my desk in the lab, a silent show of support that meant more than any words. He saw the passion in my eyes, the belief that I was on the cusp of something truly important. And I was. I finally isolated it, a unique molecular structure I called Neuroregenexis 7. It was beautiful in its complexity, elegant in its function. In early trials, it showed an almost miraculous ability to encourage nerve cell regeneration. It was the culmination of my life's work. When I presented my findings, even the most stoic members of the board were visibly moved. Mr. Abernathy, his hands trembling with age and excitement, had called it the company's crown jewel. He assured me it would be my legacy and the company's future. The patent was filed under the company's name, of course. That was standard. But in my heart, and in the eyes of everyone who was there in the beginning, it was Lillian Hall's discovery. Then things began to change. Mr. Abernathy retired, his health failing. He passed away a few years later, and with him went the soul of the company. OmniGen was acquired, then acquired again. It grew into a faceless global entity. The new CEO, a man named Alastair Finch, was everything Mr. Abernathy was not. He was slick, with a sharp suit and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He spoke a language I didn't understand, a dialect of buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and leveraging assets. He saw spreadsheets, not people. He saw profit margins, not patience. I tried to be optimistic. I thought the work would speak for itself. I presented the Neuroregenexis 7 project to Mr. Finch, explaining its potential, the years of research that had gone into it, the hope it represented. He listened with a polite, vacant expression, nodding occasionally. He said it was very compelling and that he would circle back with the development team. I never heard another word about it. My project, my life's work, was quietly shelved. My research budget was cut, then cut again. I was reassigned to more mundane, commercially viable projects, tweaking formulas for over-the-counter allergy medications. It felt like being a concert pianist and being asked to play children's nursery rhymes. The fire in me began to dim. Frank had passed away by then, a sudden heart attack that had left a gaping hole in my world. The lab became my refuge more than ever, the only place where I could silence the grief, the only place where I still felt a flicker of my old self. I held on to the hope that one day, someone would see the value in my research again. That one day, Neuroregenexus 7 would see the light of day. Then came the letter. It arrived on what would have been my 43rd anniversary with the company. There was no handshake, no thank you, no final meeting with the manager. Just the letter, and later, a cardboard box delivered to my apartment containing the few personal items from my desk, a framed photo of Frank, a chipped coffee mug, and a small, potted fern I'd nurtured for years. They had security escort me from the building the day before, my access card deactivated before I even reached my car. I was treated like a stranger, a potential threat. The humiliation was a physical pain, a tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. That night, I sat alone in my small apartment in Akron, the city lights twinkling outside my window. The box of my belongings sat on the floor, a sad little monument to a life's work. I was 64 years old. Too young to feel this old, too old to start over. I had given OmniGen the best years of my life. I had given them my intellect, my passion, my loyalty. I had given them a discovery that could have changed the world and helped millions. And in return, they gave me a letter, a box, and the deafening silence of an empty life. The word redundant echoed in my mind. It was more than a termination. It was an erasure. They had not just fired me, they had tried to delete my entire existence. And in the dark, quiet solitude of my apartment, I began to feel a profound and bottomless sadness, a grief not just for my job, but for the person I used to be. The days that followed the firing bled into one another, a monotonous gray landscape of silence and stillness. My apartment, once a cozy sanctuary from the demanding world of the lab, began to feel like a cage. The quiet that I had once craved now roared in my ears. I would wake up at 5:30 a.m., my body still programmed to the rhythms of my old life, only to remember there was nowhere to go. There was no commute, no lab coat to put on, no complex problem waiting for me to solve. There was just the four walls of my living room and the suffocating feeling of being utterly, completely useless. I tried to establish a new routine. I would make my coffee, read the local paper, and then I would sit. I'd stare out the window at the people walking below, heading to their jobs, living their lives. I felt like a ghost watching a world I was no longer a part of. The financial anxiety started as a low hum and quickly grew into a constant, throbbing headache. My severance was modest, an insultingly small sum for 4 decades of service. My pension was not what I had hoped for. I had always been frugal, Frank and I both, but we had planned for a comfortable retirement, not this sudden, forced exile into unemployment. I did what one is supposed to do. I updated my resume, a document that spanned over 4 decades and felt more like a historical text than a job application. I highlighted my skills, my publications, my patents, all filed under OmniGen's name, of course. I sent it out to dozens of companies. The responses were few and far between. Most were automated rejection emails. A few led to phone calls, where I could almost hear the recruiter's surprise at my age. 42 years at one company? That's remarkable, they'd say. The word remarkable, a polite substitute for ancient. I was a relic from a bygone era of company loyalty. No one wanted a scientist in her mid-60s. They wanted young, hungry graduates who cost less and didn't question the new ways of doing things. Ageism wasn't a word I had thought much about before, but now I felt it sting every single day. It was a quiet, insidious cruelty. I remember one afternoon, I was cleaning out a closet, trying to declutter my life, when I came across an old box of Frank's tools. I picked up a heavy wrench, its metal cool and solid in my hand. I could see him so clearly, his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked on our old car. He could fix anything. A broken engine, a leaky faucet, a rattling heater. He always knew how to make things work again. I sat on the floor of the closet, clutching that wrench, and I wept. I wept for him, for our life together, but mostly, I wept for myself. I couldn't fix this. I didn't know how to make my own life work again. The loneliness was a heavy cloak. My friends were mostly former colleagues, and while a few reached out initially, the calls soon dwindled. I understood. It was awkward. I was a cautionary tale, a reminder of their own precarious positions in the new corporate world. My evenings were the hardest. I would make dinner for one, then sit and talk to a framed photograph of Frank on the mantelpiece. They just threw it all away. Frank, I'd whisper to his smiling face. All those years, all that work. For nothing. His picture was a poor substitute for his warm presence, but it was all I had left. Months passed. My savings were dwindling at an alarming rate. I started cutting back on everything, buying the cheaper brand of coffee, keeping the thermostat turned down until I shivered, canceling my newspaper subscription. The shame of it was a bitter pill. I, Lillian Hall, a PhD chemist, a senior scientist, was counting pennies to buy groceries. The feeling of being redundant had seeped into my bones. It wasn't just a job status, it was my new identity. One rainy Saturday, overcome with a desperate need to do something, I decided to tackle the boxes of old work documents I had stored in the attic. They were mostly old research notes, binders filled with data from projects long since completed. The company had told me to destroy any proprietary information, but these were my personal notebooks, my thought processes, the very genesis of my ideas. They felt like a part of my mind, and I couldn't bring myself to shred them. Now, looking at them felt like torture, a reminder of a life I no longer had. I sat on the dusty floor, sneezing from the disturbed motes of dust, and began to page through a thick, leather-bound notebook from the very beginning of my career. My handwriting was different then, tighter, more precise. The pages were filled with equations, diagrams, and late-night thoughts. As I turned a page, a different kind of paper, folded and tucked inside, fluttered out. It was a copy of my original employment contract, dated 1978. I hadn't seen it in decades. I almost threw it away, but something made me stop. Nostalgia, perhaps. I unfolded the brittle, yellowed pages. It was typed on a typewriter, signed by a young me and a confident Mr. Abernathy. I scanned the dense legal text, my eyes glazing over until I reached a section titled Intellectual Property and Reversionary Rights. I read the paragraph once, then twice. My heart started to beat a little faster. It was a clause I had vaguely remembered, something Mr. Abernathy himself had pointed out as a sign of good faith. It was a standard clause in those days, a protection for the inventor. It stated, in clear and unambiguous language, that if the company failed to commercially develop or make a good faith effort to bring to market any patented invention within 5 years of the patent being granted, and if the original inventor's employment was terminated, the full rights to that patent would revert to the inventor. My hands began to tremble. Neuroregenexis 7. The patent was granted a little over 6 years ago, and they had terminated my employment. I sat there on the dusty attic floor, my mind racing. Had they done anything with it? I knew they had shelved the project, but had they made any good faith effort? I didn't think so. Finch had dismissed it out of hand. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was at my old desktop computer, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a purpose I hadn't felt in months. I scoured OmniGen's public investor reports, their press releases, their SEC filings. There was no mention of Neuroregenexis 7. Not a single line item for its development budget. Not a whisper of it in their future pipeline. They had buried it. They had buried my legacy, and in doing so, they might have made the biggest mistake of their corporate lives. A few days later, I was watching the evening news, a habit I'd kept from my life with Frank. A segment came on about the pharmaceutical industry. A major competitor of OmniGen had just announced the catastrophic failure of their flagship Alzheimer's drug in its final stage of clinical trials. Their stock was plummeting. The market was now desperate for a viable alternative. An industry analyst appeared on screen, a sharp young man with glasses. He was talking about the massive void this failure had created. He said, any company that had a viable neuroregenerative compound in its back pocket right now, something that could even hint at repairing neural damage, would not just be sitting on a gold mine. We're talking about a market valuation that could easily top $750 million. I dropped my teacup. It shattered on the floor, but I didn't hear it. The number hung in the air, unreal and astronomical. $750 million. That was the value of the hope I had created. That was the value of the legacy they had tried to erase. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. It was about the patients who were being denied a chance because of one man's arrogance and corporate negligence. A new feeling began to replace the sadness and despair that had been my constant companions. It was a cold, quiet, and formidable anger. The fire I thought had been extinguished was not gone. It had merely been banking its embers, waiting for a breath of wind. And that old, forgotten contract was the gust it needed. They had taken my job, my dignity, my purpose. But they had made a fatal error. They had forgotten to take my name off the one thing that mattered most. The decision to fight was one thing, a single, defiant moment of clarity in my dusty attic. The reality of it was something else entirely, a terrifying, mountainous task that seemed impossible for a woman armed with nothing more than a pension, a 40-year-old contract, and a righteous sense of fury. OmniGen was a Goliath. Their legal department was a fortress, staffed by an army of the most expensive and ruthless lawyers money could buy. I was Lillian Hall, a retired chemist from Akron with a dwindling savings account. My first step was to find a lawyer, and that in itself was a demoralizing journey. The first two firms I called, large and reputable ones, listened politely to my story before gently explaining the prohibitive cost of taking on a corporate giant. They spoke of discovery phases costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, of motions and counter-motions designed to bleed a plaintiff dry long before they ever saw a courtroom. They saw me as a liability, a sentimental old woman on a fool's errand. I left their opulent offices feeling smaller and more powerless than ever. I was ready to give up. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at that old contract, feeling the last embers of my anger dying out, to be replaced by the cold ash of defeat. Then I remembered a conversation with Frank years ago. Our neighbor's son, Mark, had just passed the bar exam. Frank had been so impressed with him. "That boy's got a good heart, Lily," he'd said. "He's not one of those slick city types. He's got his father's integrity." Mark had opened a small, one-man practice in a modest office building downtown. It felt like a long shot, a desperate one, but it was the only shot I had left. I called him. Mark Riley remembered me, and more importantly, he remembered Frank. He listened to my entire story without interruption, his voice patient and kind on the phone. When I finished, there was a long pause. I held my breath, expecting another polite dismissal. "Mrs. Hall," he said finally, his voice now tinged with something I hadn't heard from the other lawyers. Curiosity. "Could you come to my office? And please, bring everything you have. Especially that old contract." Mark's office was the polar opposite of the others. It was a bit cluttered, lined with law books that looked well used, and smelled of brewing coffee. Mark himself was in his early 30s, with a serious face, but kind eyes. He wasn't slick or polished. He wore a slightly rumpled suit, and he listened with an intensity that made me feel seen for the first time in a very long time. I laid out my notebooks, the patent documents, and the old contract on his desk. He spent nearly 2 hours poring over them, his brow furrowed in concentration. He read the reversionary clause 3 times, then looked up at me. "This is an ironclad clause, Lillian," he said, using my first name for the first time. "They don't write them like this anymore. This is from an era when a person's contribution was still valued. And your documentation, it's meticulous. It's a chronological record of their negligence." He leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "They think you're just a sweet old lady they can discard. They have no idea who they're dealing with." For the first time, a flicker of genuine hope ignited within me. The first letter from Mark to OmniGen was a polite but firm declaration of my rights under the 1978 contract. The response was what we expected, a dismissive, arrogant letter from their head of legal, a Mr. Davies. It dripped with condescension, referring to my claim as frivolous and without merit and warning us to cease and desist to avoid legal sanctions. They were trying to scare me, to bully me into silence. The old Lillian would have crumbled. But the new Lillian, the one forged in the fires of betrayal and rediscovery, was different. I told Mark to push forward. The battle that ensued was a war of attrition. They buried us in paperwork, filing motion after motion to delay and drain our resources. Mark, true to Frank's assessment, was brilliant. He worked tirelessly, often late into the night. He was David, and he was using his slingshot with surgical precision. I used a significant portion of my remaining savings to fund the fight, a terrifying gamble that left my bank account perilously low. There were nights I lay awake, heart pounding with fear, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake, if I was going to lose everything I had left. During one of our strategy sessions, Mark showed me a deposition from Alastair Finch. In it, Finch barely remembered me. He referred to my life's work, Neuroregion X's 7, as some legacy compound that was not aligned with our forward-facing synergistic strategy. Reading those words, so dismissive and detached, didn't hurt me anymore. It fueled me. He hadn't just forgotten me, he had forgotten the value of what I created. His hubris was our greatest weapon. The turning point came during the discovery phase. Mark's relentless digging uncovered an internal OmniGen memo. It was a risk assessment of their intellectual property portfolio, written just after Finch took over. Next to the patent for Neuroregion X's 7, there was a handwritten note from Finch himself. It read, "No market viability. Inventor is past retirement. Let it lapse. Let it lapse." He hadn't just shelved it, he had intentionally planned to abandon it, assuming I was too old and disempowered to ever notice or care. He had made a calculated decision to let a potential $750 million asset wither and die, all because he couldn't see past his own arrogance and my age. When Mark presented this memo, the entire tone of the negotiation changed. OmniGen's lawyers knew they were beaten. Finch's negligence was now documented in his own hand. They were facing not only the loss of the patent, but a massive shareholder lawsuit. The settlement talks were tense. Their lawyers tried to offer me a purely financial settlement, a large sum of money to simply go away and sign a non-disclosure agreement. It was tempting. That money would have solved all my financial worries for the rest of my life. But I looked at Mark, and I thought of Frank, and I thought of all the people suffering from the diseases my compound could one day treat. This was never just about money. No, I said, my voice clear and steady in the silent, wood-paneled room. The money is secondary. I want my patent. I want my name back. They fought it, but they had no leverage left. In the end, they agreed. I signed the papers, not with a trembling hand, but with a firm, steady one. I walked out of that building not as a redundant employee, but as the sole owner of one of the most valuable biomedical patents in the world. I didn't feel triumphant, not in a loud, celebratory way. I felt a quiet, profound sense of justice, a righting of a terrible wrong. But the story doesn't end there. I had my patent, my legacy, but what was I to do with it? The offers from other pharmaceutical giants came pouring in, astronomical sums that could have made me one of the wealthiest women in Ohio. But I thought of Alastair Finch, and I saw the same soulless, profit-driven machine in all of them. Selling to them would be a different kind of betrayal. Instead, I did something else. I used a small portion of the capital I was able to raise against the patent's value to start a foundation. I called it the Hall Abernathy Foundation for Neurointegrity, honoring both my dear Frank and the man who first gave me a chance, Mr. Abernathy. It's a nonprofit dedicated to ethical research and development. My office is no longer a corner in my quiet apartment. It's a small but bustling research center affiliated with a local university. I don't wear a lab coat much these days. I'm too busy mentoring a new generation of brilliant, passionate young scientists. They're the heart of the foundation. We've partnered with a smaller, more conscientious pharmaceutical company to begin the long and expensive process of bringing Neuroregion X's 7 through clinical trials. Our primary goal is not to create shareholder value, but to create an accessible and affordable treatment. Sometimes I walk through our new lab. It has that same smell of antiseptic and ozone, the smell of progress. But it's different now. It's filled with hope, not pressure. It's filled with collaboration, not corporate politics. This lab, this foundation, this new chapter, it's mine. It was built not from a desire for revenge, but from a refusal to be erased. The worst day of my life, the day I received that cold, heartless letter, turned out to be the first day of my true legacy. They tried to make me redundant, to cast me aside like a worn-out part. But they forgot one simple, fundamental truth: a lifetime of knowledge, a heart full of purpose, and the unwavering belief in one's own worth are things that can never, ever be made redundant. And it is never, ever too late to build something new from the ruins of what was taken from you. The victory, when it came, was not a thunderous explosion, but a quiet dawn. There were no triumphant speeches, no champagne corks popping. There was only the weight of the signed documents in my hands and the profound, echoing silence of a battle won. I had stared into the heart of a corporate Goliath and had not flinched. I had taken back my life's work. In the first few weeks, that feeling was enough. It was a balm on the wounds of humiliation and dismissal. The creation of the Hall Abernathy Foundation felt like building a monument not to myself, but to decency, to the idea that science should serve humanity before it serves shareholders. But monuments are cold, and dawn is inevitably followed by the harsh, unfiltered light of day. The reality of what I had done began to settle in, not as a victory, but as a responsibility of terrifying proportions. I was no longer just Lillian Hall, chemist. I was Lillian Hall, founder and director. My days, once filled with the elegant dance of molecules and the satisfying logic of chemical equations, were now a chaotic tangle of spreadsheets, grant proposals, budget meetings, and donor phone calls. I had spent my life in a laboratory, a world of measurable truths and predictable reactions. Now, I found myself in the world of people, a world of unpredictable emotions, hidden agendas, and endless shades of gray. I felt like a deep-sea fish brought suddenly to the surface, gasping in the unfamiliar air. The foundation was housed in a modest wing of the local university, a partnership I had been proud to forge. Yet, I often found myself staring out my new office window, across the manicured lawns where students hurried to class, and I would feel a pang of an emotion I could only identify as homesickness. I missed my old lab at OmniGen. Not the company, never the company, but the sanctuary of my small corner, the familiar hum of the ventilation system, the comfort of knowing my purpose the moment I walked through the door. Here, my purpose felt nebulous, buried under piles of administrative tasks. I had fought to reclaim my science, only to become a bureaucrat. My team of young scientists was brilliant, of that there was no doubt. They were the brightest minds the university had to offer, their energy a palpable force in our new labs. Leading them was a young woman named Dr. Anika Sharma. Anika was a force of nature. She possessed an intellect so sharp it was almost intimidating, combined with an ambition that burned like a pilot light. She saw Neuroregenexus 7 not just as a compound, but as a ladder. She was fiercely dedicated, working hours that reminded me of my own younger self. But there was a fundamental difference between us, a generational chasm I struggled to bridge. I had come of age in an era of painstaking, methodical progress. Discovery was a slow waltz, a dance of patience and perseverance. Anika and her peers lived in an age of sprints, of rapid iteration and disruptive breakthroughs. They saw my caution as hesitation, my insistence on repeating and verifying every step as a sign of timidness. Lillian, the modeling software predicts a 98% success rate with this synthesis pathway, she would say, her tone a careful blend of respect and impatience. We don't need to run the preliminary degradation tests again. We could save 2 weeks. 2 weeks is nothing in the grand scheme of things, Anika, I would reply, my voice softer than I intended. But a flawed foundation, one tiny variable we overlook because we were in a hurry, that can bring the entire house down years from now. I could see the frustration in her eyes, the barely concealed belief that I was a relic, clinging to outdated methods. She respected me as the inventor, the legend, but I wasn't sure she trusted me as a leader. She couldn't understand that my slowness was not born of fear, but of experience. I had seen too many certainties dissolve into dust, too many shortcuts lead to dead ends. One evening, I was sitting alone in my office, the building now quiet. On my desk was a photo of Frank, taken on a fishing trip in Canada. He was holding up a small, unimpressive-looking fish, but his smile was radiant. I remembered that day. He'd spent hours meticulously tying his own flies, choosing the right spot on the river, casting and recasting his line with a meditative patience I had always admired. I had grown restless, wanting to move on, but he had just shaken his head and smiled. "The fish will come when they're ready, Lily," he'd said. "You can't rush the river." I looked at his smiling face in the photo and whispered, "I'm trying, Frank. I'm trying not to rush the river." But this current is so strong. I felt the familiar ache of his absence, a void that this new, busy life could not fill. If anything, it amplified it. He had been my anchor, the one who understood my quiet dedication, and now I was adrift. The partnership with the smaller pharmaceutical company, Kinetics Labs, was a blessing. Their CEO, a man named Ben Carter, shared my vision. He was an idealist in a field of sharks, and he put his company's future on the line to partner with my foundation. Together, we navigated the labyrinth of FDA regulations and prepared for the first phase of human clinical trials. The day we got the approval to begin was a milestone. A small group of us gathered in the main lab, and for the first time in months, the air was electric with pure, unadulterated hope. Anika's smile was brilliant, and as she shook my hand, I saw a flash of genuine, shared excitement that transcended our differences. In that moment, we were not a young scientist and an old one. We were two chemists on the verge of something extraordinary. The initial results from the Phase 1 trial were better than I had dared to dream. The compound was safe, well tolerated by the volunteers, and early biomarkers indicated it was behaving exactly as my decades of research had predicted. The news was intoxicating. A few medical journals ran small articles. The local news did a feature. I started to feel the ground beneath my feet again. The administrative work felt less like a burden and more like the necessary scaffolding to support something magnificent. Maybe I could do this. Maybe I hadn't made a terrible mistake. And then the river hit a waterfall. The call came from Ben Carter at Kinetics. His voice was strained, stripped of its usual optimism. "Lillian, we have a problem. A big one." The issue wasn't with the science, not directly. It was a problem of logistics, of scaling up. The small, pristine batches of Neuroregenexis 7 we created in our university lab were stable. But when Kinetics tried to produce the compound in the larger quantities needed for the next phases of trials, something went wrong. It was a subtle molecular degradation. The compound was breaking down, its delicate structure unspooling like a ball of yarn. It was still safe, but it was becoming inert, useless. The window of its viability was a matter of hours, not the weeks or months needed for manufacturing and distribution. My miracle cure had the shelf life of a carton of milk. The news hit the foundation like a physical blow. The optimism evaporated, replaced by a tense, fearful silence. The cost of solving this problem would be astronomical, requiring a complete re-engineering of the synthesis process. Kinetics, being a small company, didn't have unlimited funds. Their stock, which had risen on the good news, began to tumble. Ben Carter, though trying to remain supportive, was under immense pressure from his own board. Whispers started to circulate. I heard them in the hallways, saw them in the concerned glances of my own staff. The old woman had gotten her patent back, but she was in over her head. She didn't know how to run a real-world drug development program. Alistair Finch's ghost seemed to haunt me. An anonymous source, almost certainly from OmniGen, leaked a statement to a financial news outlet suggesting that OmniGen had been aware of the inherent instability of the compound for years, which was why they had strategically deprioritized it. It was a lie, a vicious, calculated lie designed to ruin me and vindicate them. But it was a lie that people were starting to believe. My glorious victory was curdling into a public failure. The weight on my shoulders became unbearable. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of the people I was failing. The hope I had so proudly championed now felt like a cruel lie I had told to the world. The self-doubt I had fought so hard to overcome after my firing returned with a vengeance. I was 65 years old. What was I thinking? I should have sold the patent. I should have taken the money and retired to a small, quiet house by a lake. I had been arrogant, believing I could change the system. The system was now chewing me up and preparing to spit me out. The tension between me and Anika reached its breaking point. She came into my office, her face pale with stress, but her eyes blazing. She had a proposal, a radical new synthesis method involving a catalytic agent that was still highly experimental. It could work, Lillian, she urged, spreading charts and data across my desk. The simulations are chaotic, but there are pathways to a stable molecule. It's a risk, but we're out of time. We have to take a big swing. I looked at her data. It was brilliant, but it was also reckless. It was a Hail Mary pass, a shot in the dark. No, Anika, I said, my voice heavy with a weariness that felt ancient. This isn't the way. We don't know the long-term effects of this catalyst. We could be creating a new problem, something far worse than instability. We have to be sure. Sure? We'll be bankrupt before we're sure, she retorted, her voice rising. Don't you see? It's all falling apart. Your caution, your slowness, it's going to sink us all. Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. I have spent my entire life avoiding leaps of faith in the lab. I snapped back, my own control finally breaking. Science is not about faith. It is about proof. It is about getting it right, not getting it fast. I will not risk turning this cure into a poison because we are impatient. The silence that followed was thick and painful. Anika stared at me, her disappointment a palpable thing. I thought you were a visionary, she said quietly. But you're just afraid. She turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the suffocating quiet of my office. Her words stung more than any lie OmniGen could have concocted, because a part of me feared she was right. Was I just afraid? Had I lost my nerve? That evening, I went home and found a letter in my mailbox. It wasn't in a business envelope. It was a simple, personal letter, the address written in a slightly shaky hand. I opened it. It was from a man named Arthur Gable, who lived in a small town a few hours away. He wrote that his wife, Eleanor, had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 5 years ago. He had been her full-time caregiver ever since. He wrote not of the science, but of the small, daily heartbreaks, the day she forgot his name, the day she no longer recognized their own home. He had read an article about me, about my fight to get my patent back, about my foundation. He wrote, Mrs. Hall, I don't know if your medicine will be the one. I don't know if it will come in time for my Eleanor. But I wanted to thank you. Not for finding a cure, but for trying. In a world that feels so full of greed and people who don't care, you have reminded me that there are still people who fight for the right reasons. You have given an old man a little bit of hope, and for that, I am eternally grateful. He had included a small, faded photograph of him and his wife, taken on their wedding day. They were so young, so full of life, their faces beaming with a future they could not have known would be stolen from them. I sat there in my lonely apartment, and I held that letter and that photograph, and I cried. But these were not the tears of despair or self-pity. They were tears of clarification. Anika was wrong. I wasn't afraid to fail. I was terrified of failing Arthur and Eleanor. The weight of their hope, and the hope of millions like them, was not a burden to be feared, but a sacred trust to be honored. This wasn't about my legacy or my reputation. It was about that young couple in the photograph. I had to get it right, not for me, but for them. The next morning, I did not go to my office. I did not look at a single spreadsheet or answer a single email. I walked straight to the lab. Anika was there, her shoulders slumped in defeat as she stared at a screen of failed simulation data. I walked over and stood beside her. I didn't apologize, and neither did she. There was no need. I have an idea, I said quietly. But it's not a shortcut. It's the long way around. The very long way. I pulled out my keys and unlocked a large metal cabinet in the corner of the lab. It contained my life's work, dozens of my original, handwritten notebooks from my years at OmniGen. They were dusty and faded, filled with 40 years of dead ends, failed experiments, and forgotten thoughts. Somewhere in here, I said, placing the first notebook on the table between us, is a mistake I made 30 years ago. And I think that mistake might be the answer we need now. Anika looked from the notebooks to my face, And for the first time, the impatience in her eyes was replaced by a deep, unwavering curiosity. The master and the apprentice, the old world and the new, were finally ready to work together. The scent of the old notebooks was a complex perfume of aged paper, ink, and time itself. For days, Anika and I lived in that lab, surrounded by the ghosts of my past experiments. We didn't just look at the successful data, we dove headfirst into the failures. We analyzed every discarded hypothesis, every reaction that didn't go as planned. I explained to Anika not just what I had done, but why. I told her about the limitations of the technology one had been, the compromises I had to make. For her, it was like an archaeological dig into the history of her own field. She saw the foundations upon which her modern techniques were built. The gap between us, the one of age and method, began to close. It was replaced by a shared language of pure science. We worked side by side, a strange and wonderful partnership. Her mind was quick, able to run complex simulations on a whim, testing my old theories with a speed I could never have imagined. My mind was slower, but it held the map. It remembered the terrain, the dead ends I had already explored, the hidden valleys I had passed by. We were a perfect complement, her technological prowess guided by my long-term memory and institutional knowledge. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday, late in the evening. We were examining a series of experiments from the late 1980s. I had been trying to bond a particular side chain to the core molecule, but the reaction was too sluggish. To speed it up, I had used a certain catalyst. To stabilize the final compound, I had added a phosphate group. It had failed. The resulting compound was incredibly stable, rock solid in fact, but the catalyst and the phosphate group together had rendered it almost inert. It had no therapeutic value. I had marked it in my notebook with a frustrated red X and moved on, deeming it a complete waste of 6 months' work. "Wait a minute," Anika said, pointing at the old, faded equation. "Lillian, look at this. The stabilizing agent, the phosphate, you added it at the end of the reaction." "Of course," I said. "That's standard procedure. You build the molecule, then you stabilize it." "But what if it's not?" she said, her eyes wide with excitement. She turned to her computer and started typing furiously, her fingers a blur. "Your problem back then was a sluggish reaction. Our problem now is a compound that's too reactive, too unstable. We're on opposite ends of the same seesaw." She ran a new simulation, one that reordered the steps. In her model, she introduced the phosphate stabilizing agent during the initial synthesis, not after. It was a counterintuitive, almost backward way of doing things. We watched the screen as the simulation ran. It was like watching a flower bloom in fast forward. The phosphate group, introduced early, acted as a kind of molecular chaperone. It guided the formation of the neuroregion Nexus 7 molecule, protecting its delicate structure as it was being built. The resulting virtual compound was not only therapeutically active, it was perfectly, beautifully stable. It was the same failed experiment from 30 years ago, but viewed through a new lens, applied to a new problem. My old mistake wasn't a mistake at all. It was a solution waiting for the right question. We spent the next 48 hours in the lab, barely sleeping, fueled by coffee and adrenaline. We replicated the simulation with real chemicals, our hands moving with a shared, unspoken purpose. Anika's technical skill was flawless, and my experience kept us from making any careless errors. The final test was to leave the newly synthesized compound out, exposed, and measure its degradation over time. We measured it after 1 hour. No change. 12 hours. No change. 24. 48. 72 hours. It was as stable as the day it was created. We had done it. We had found the answer. It wasn't a reckless leap of faith, nor was it an overly cautious crawl. It was a bridge built between the past and the future, a solution born of my experience and Anika's innovation. When I called Ben Carter at Kinetics, my voice didn't shake. I stated the facts calmly, explaining the new synthesis process. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a choked, "Lillian, are you serious?" We sent them the data and a sample. Their own labs confirmed it within a day. The crisis was over. The waterfall we had gone over had not dashed us on the rocks below, but had instead delivered us to a calm, wide river, the path forward now clear and bright. That evening, I stood with Anika by the window of the lab, looking out at the city lights of Akron. We were both exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired. "Thank you, Lillian," she said softly, "for not giving up, and for showing me the value of a wrong turn." "The wrong turns are where you learn the most," I replied, a small smile on my face. "They just take a little longer to make sense." I thought of the letter from Arthur Gable, which I now kept in my desk drawer. This wasn't just a scientific victory, it was a promise renewed. The fight was far from over. The next phases of trials would be long and arduous, and there would be other challenges, other mountains to climb. But for the first time since this journey began, I didn't feel alone. I had a team, I had a partner in Anika, and I had a purpose that was clearer than ever before. They had tried to erase me, to call me redundant. But in doing so, they had forced me to find a new way to be essential, not just as a chemist, but as a mentor, a leader, and a guardian of a fragile and precious thing called hope. The road ahead was long, but my steps felt steady. I was ready for the next mile. The lab was never the same after that. The tense, fearful energy that had permeated its walls was replaced by a quiet, thrumming hum of focused determination. The solution to the stability problem had not just saved the project, it had forged our team into a true unit. Anika and I, once on opposite sides of a generational and methodological divide, were now inextricably linked. We moved as one, her brilliant, rapid-fire innovation tethered to the grounding weight of my experience. We were no longer two separate scientists. We were two halves of a single, formidable mind. The years that followed were a marathon, not a sprint. Bringing a drug to market is a slow, methodical crawl through a bureaucratic jungle, and I was determined to walk it with integrity. Phase 2 of the clinical trials began, expanding to a larger group of patients. With our new, stable synthesis process, Kinetics Labs was able to produce Neuroregenexis 7 in perfect, consistent batches. Ben Carter's faith and his company's future had been vindicated. He once called me, his voice thick with emotion, and simply said, "You saved us all, Lillian." But I knew the truth. We had all saved each other. During this time, I often thought of Arthur Gable's letter. His words had become a talisman for me, a reminder of the human cost of failure and the profound importance of our work. I kept the faded photograph of him and his young bride, Eleanor, in my desk drawer. On days when the paperwork felt insurmountable, when a setback in a trial participant felt like a personal failing, I would take it out and look at their hopeful faces. I was not just developing a compound, I was fighting for their stolen future. One spring morning, I received another letter from Arthur. His handwriting was more frantic this time, the words tumbling over each other. Eleanor was slipping away faster. The small moments of lucidity were becoming rarer, the fog thicker. He wrote that he felt he was losing her, not in one fell swoop, but one precious memory at a time. He ended the letter with a desperate, heartbreaking plea. "Is there any hope for us, Mrs. Hall? Is there anything you can do?" My foundation and kinetics were not yet approved for compassionate use programs. It was a risk, a massive one, to even consider it. It could jeopardize the entire trial process if anything went wrong. My head, the cautious scientist part of me, screamed no. But my heart, the part that held Eleanor's wedding photo, could not ignore his plea. After a long, soul-searching conversation with Ben Carter and a fraught meeting with our ethics board, we made a decision. Eleanor Gable would be admitted into the trial as a special case, closely monitored. It was a leap of faith, the very thing I had once railed against. But it felt like the only human thing to do. I drove to their small home myself to oversee the first administration. Arthur, a kind man with weariness etched into the lines around his eyes, greeted me with a trembling handshake. Eleanor was sitting in a recliner by the window, her gaze distant, unfocused. She was beautiful, even with the blankness in her eyes. I saw the ghost of the young woman from the photograph. As a nurse administered the treatment, Arthur held his wife's hand, his head bowed as if in prayer. I felt an almost unbearable weight of responsibility. For the first few weeks, there was nothing. Arthur's daily reports were filled with a quiet, polite disappointment. I began to fear I had made a terrible mistake, offering false hope where there was none. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Arthur. He was weeping, but they were not tears of sorrow. "Lillian," he choked out, his voice cracking. We were listening to the radio. An old song came on, one we used to dance to in the kitchen. And she started to hum. She hummed it, Lillian. And then she looked at me. She really looked at me. And she said, "Arthur, turn it up." I love this song. I sat down heavily in my office chair, tears streaming down my own face. It wasn't a cure. It wasn't a miracle that erased the disease. But it was a flicker. A light had been switched on in a dark room. It was a moment of connection, a thread of her old self pulled back from the void. Over the next few months, more flickers appeared. One day, she called their cat by its name. Another day, she asked Arthur if he had remembered to water the gardenias. They were small moments, tiny islands in a vast sea of forgetting, but to Arthur, they were everything. They were proof that the woman he loved was still in there. As phase 3 of our trials progressed, stories like Eleanor's began to emerge from other participants. The drug was not a reverse switch. It did not rebuild a life that had been dismantled. But it slowed the dismantling. It preserved what was left. It gave families more time, more moments, more good days. It gave them hope, a real, tangible hope, not just a wish. We decided to rename the compound. Neuroregenexis 7 was too clinical. We called it Abernathy's Hope, in honor of the man who had first believed in me. Meanwhile, the world was taking notice. The financial press, which had once mocked my quixotic quest, was now writing breathless articles about the miracle compound emerging from a small Ohio foundation. And they were contrasting our success with the spectacular implosion happening at OmniGen. The leak of Alastair Finch's memo, "Inventor is past retirement. Let it lapse," had ignited a firestorm. Shareholders were furious. The board, desperate to save the company's plummeting stock, launched an internal investigation. The fallout was swift and brutal. Alastair Finch was called to testify before a committee of enraged investors. The man who had dismissed me with a wave of his hand now had to publicly account for what the press was calling the billion-dollar blunder. He had not just thrown away a patent. He had thrown away the company's future out of sheer hubris and ageism. He was not just fired. He was disgraced, a pariah in the corporate world he had so desperately wanted to conquer. He was erased, just as he had tried to erase me. I took no joy in his downfall. It was simply the logical conclusion of his own actions, a predictable chemical reaction of arrogance and negligence. The day the FDA officially approved Abernathy's Hope for public use did not arrive with a fanfare. I received the email on a Thursday morning. I read it once, then twice. I printed it out and walked from my office to the main lab, where Anika was mentoring a young graduate student. I handed her the paper without a word. She read it, and her eyes filled with tears. She threw her arms around me, and we just stood there for a long moment, 2 generations of scientists, holding on to the tangible result of a lifetime of work, struggle, and belief. The quiet hum of the lab was the only applause we needed. I am in my 70s now. My hair is more white than gray, and I walk with a slower, more deliberate gait. I don't go into the foundation every day. Anika is the director of research now, a brilliant and compassionate leader who is already exploring the next generation of neurological treatments. I am the mentor, the founder, the quiet presence in the background. My role is to remember, to tell the story, to ensure that the soul of our mission is never lost in the pursuit of progress. Sometimes, young scientists or journalists ask me if I ever feel bitter about the years I lost, about the way I was treated. I used to. The anger was a necessary fuel that got me started. But you cannot run on anger forever. It burns too hot and leaves too much ash. What I feel now is a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the struggle, because it forced me to become someone I never thought I could be. Gratitude for the betrayal, because it led me to a purpose far greater than any I had known. This evening, I am home. The setting sun casts long shadows across my living room. I am looking at the photograph on my mantelpiece. Not the faded one of Eleanor and Arthur, but the one of Frank, with his grease-stained hands and his gentle smile. I pick it up, the cool silver of the frame familiar in my hands. For so long after he died, I talked to this photograph in grief, in loneliness, in despair. Then I talked to it in anger and frustration. Tonight, I talk to it in peace. "We did it, Frank," I whisper. "It took a while. There were some broken parts, but we got it working again." I place the photo back on the mantle. The journey was never about the money or the patent or even the revenge. It was about value. OmniGen believed my value expired with my youth. They believed my worth was something they could define on a spreadsheet and then discard. They were wrong. A person's value is not in their job title or their age. It is in the sum of their knowledge, the depth of their character, the passion in their heart. It is a light that can never be extinguished by someone else's shadow. They may try to declare you redundant, to tell you that your time is over. But a life's purpose is not a job you can be fired from. It is a fire you carry within. And sometimes, it takes someone trying to put that fire out to make you realize just how brightly you can burn.